Matthew Goodwin, is the rise of extremist parties European or more a national problem?
Well, I think it's certainly a trend that we have seen affecting most, but perhaps not all, Western established democracies. And I think it's not correct to say this is just a national problem that's only affecting Germany or only affecting France or only affecting Norway. I think this is something that most European democracies have been grappling with in different forms. I think one of the problems is that we've only really interpreted this trend along the lines of votes at elections. But of course, here we are in Germany, and I think here we can see quite a different form of right-wing extremism than we can see in, say, France, where it's been far more around elections and the ballot box. But I think generally we can say that this is something that is affecting most, if not all, established Western post-industrial democracies, and therefore there are lots of lessons that we can learn from individual cases, and there are also lots of lessons we can learn from comparative analysis in terms of understanding what is driving citizens in various states to support these parties, which is exactly why we publish this report.
In how far does an observably growing sense of Euroscepticism feed into the rise of extremist and populist parties in Europe?
Well, we now know a great deal about individuals who support populist, extremist, far-right political parties. We know that they are dissatisfied with the way in which their lives are heading. We know that they are pessimistic about their financial prospects. We know that they are dissatisfied with mainstream traditional political institutions. We know that they are profoundly concerned about immigration and rising ethnic and cultural diversity. And I think more than anything, we know that these individuals feel threatened by the changes that they see around them. The European Union and European integration, I think, is just one of those threats. I don't think that it's right to take that in isolation and say these are primarily Eurosceptic political parties. They're certainly drawing in sections of that Eurosceptic vote. But I think primarily what these parties are doing is rallying a coalition of support within which individuals feel fundamentally under threat from wider processes, whether that's European integration, but primarily is around immigration and rising diversity.
We at Stiftung Mercator are doing anything we can to further European integration with the projects that we do. For example, Ich will Europa, I want Europe. But what is the specific role of civil society in countering these populist and extremist parties on the European scale? And specifically, what can foundations do regarding the vast resources that they have?
Well, I think responses come in all guises and from different types of organisations, and I think there is an interesting question here around to what extent can mainstream political parties, which are very distrusted by citizens who support the far right, to what extent can those institutions really deliver an effective, credible response to anxieties over immigration and diversity? That's an open question. And then beyond that, is it the case that perhaps civil society organisations at the grassroots level, movements that are very much anchored in specific communities, foundations that are primarily about bringing people together to discuss the evidence, to make sure responses are grounded in the evidence and are not driven primarily by political motivations? I think there is a role there for those organisations to play. And to give you one example, I think what we're seeing in the United Kingdom at the moment, for example, is an attempt among foundations and civil society organisations to essentially learn lessons about what works at the grassroots. Now, within that, there are two sides of a coin. There's the reactive element of learning lessons. What can we learn about responding to a far-right organisation or a far-right movement after it has emerged? Can we take lessons away that will leave communities more resilient, that will leave local civil societies stronger? And the other side of that coin, I think, is actually not being reactive, but thinking carefully And based on the evidence, what can we start to do locally at the grassroots level that is not just about reacting, but is about proactively beginning to address some of the grievances that a significant section of the population have about issues like immigration and rising diversity? Is that, for example, about bringing different communities together around shared issues and shared grievances? Is it about opening up a dialogue with mainstream parties to ask, what are you doing at the grassroots in terms of standing candidates and just simply the process of politics? Is it about discussing with municipal government? Have you communicated to citizens clearly and transparently about how resources are distributed? And lastly, is it about talking to media? About, is this responsible coverage of what's happening locally? Is this balanced reporting? Is this a reflection of actually what's happening on the ground in terms of objective reality? So I think there are lots of roles that civil society groups can play. I just hope that those efforts are coordinated and aren't just restricted to particular communities and particular countries, because I think across Europe generally there's a lot to learn.